This is the ink bird. I've got it set for a high temperature of 130. When it gets to 131, it goes to cooling mode, and it powers up this plug, which is connected to this solenoid right here, which crimps off the oil. What happened was it crimps it off for so long that it'll almost let the fire go out. So I put a bypass valve in here, and I put another needle valve, and I set it to a drip. So when it gets too hot, it shuts the oil off, going to here. This becomes a drip going to here, and it keeps the fire going, and it lets it cool down. I put marks on everything so I know exactly where they sit when it's running at a good steady speed. And when you get ready to turn it off, you shut this one valve, is the only one you turn off. You shut this valve off, the oil supply stops, it goes out. When it cools off, everything stops. So it's a very simple little system. This little valve from Amazon was $22. The ink bird was about $35 or $36, made for reptiles, real reasonable, and it's really doing a fine job in there right now. A lot of good heat coming out of that stove. The new one I'm building right now, it's going to have all of these features on it, only even a little bit simpler. But I just wanted to show you how this works, and it really makes it a lot safer. I still would never want to walk away from it. Make sure you're standing here. If this thing's running, make sure you're standing here. That's in case something was to happen. The fan was to quit blowing or whatever. This one, the exhaust temperature is way above 300 degrees. We've got a fan blowing down this stack to help keep it cool. And the new one, you'll see it's going to have a heat exchanger in it. And that heat exchanger is going to cool that exhaust way down. We'll show you that. Your probe is sensing the air temperature that's blowing out of the stove. So right now the air temperature blowing out of the stove is 113, and when it gets to 130, it's going to shut her down. So here's a look at our heat exchanger that we built. All stainless steel pipes. So what I'm going to do is I've taken my propane cylinder out of this furnace. I'm using the bottle upside down, so instead of cutting the top out and leaving the legs underneath the bottom of it, the other one, it blows a little bit warmer air out one side than the other because of the legs that were on the bottom of it that I cut off. So I think I'll get better airflow underneath of this, is why I've turned the cylinder upside down. Right here's where I've cut my hole for my heat exchanger to go in. So we've stuck the heat exchanger into the side of it. Right here it's upside down, but I wanted to show you that we've made these pieces here, 2 side pieces, 2 top pieces, and now we've got to flip it over on the other side and fill in those last 2 pieces. So I laid it on its back and slid the propane part into the 55-gallon drum, heat exchanger and all, and now I've cut the back of it out, and I'm going to weld this all down. We've cut an opening for our fan. We've got a direct drive fan we're going to put on it. We've got to box all that in around where the fan's going to go. But if you notice, you see the 2 legs, there's 4 legs holding the propane cylinder in there. And I put the legs straight with the opening of the fan so that one side's not going to be hotter than the other side, which is what's wrong with my other one. We learned that the hard way. So we've got our fan mounted. So this is the holder that's going to hold the back of the stalk. This is where your fan and your oil pump bolts on. And then what we'll do is we'll add the stock onto this, and we'll keep it at a perfect 90 degrees so it hits the pan in the bottom just right, and then we'll put it in a bandsaw and we'll saw it so it's a perfect cut, so both pieces match. And where they match will be sitting inside of here, and then the lid, when the lid goes on, it covers everything perfectly, so all of this is going to be on exactly the same plane. So this is coming out of the heat exchanger, and of course we're laying on the side. We're going to put these side panels in, and then coming out of the top right here is going to be my 8-inch, and I'm choking it down to a 6. And then we're getting down ready to start making the stock. And this is the old stock out of my old stove that we started with, and we modified it to where your oil pipe goes in, turns and goes down. But I'm going to change that. Plus it's going to have to be a foot longer because this stove's a foot taller. So one of the more important things is to make sure that this stem right here is where the burner, the blower and everything's going to go on, the oil pump and the blower. And you can see how good of a fit I have. So that what I'm going to do is I'll cut that off, and it'll have a seam right here where the stock and this tube meet together perfectly. And then the lid will fit perfectly on top of that. So all this has to fit really good. This top's going to have to be ground all the way around so that the lid fits on perfectly tight so it doesn't leak. See, this now has a hinge pin and a locking plate. It's also 8 inches taller than the other stove. And I kind of made my air ducts on each side kind of go down towards the floor. And then everything up here just kind of goes out into the shop to heat the shop. But I'll show you how we're going to light it here right off the get-go. This is all pretty simple, so you can take, and when you want to take the stalk out to clean it, I clean it about every 8 or 10 hours. When you want to take the stalk out and clean it, open the door, you pull this line out, you grab a hold of it, you pull it out, or you put it back in once you get it clean. What I do is I have a little homemade funnel here. I stick my little funnel in there like that. I take 2 ounces of kerosene, pour my kerosene in, and that goes all the way down to the bottom of the bowl. Get everything out of that funnel. I put my line back in, and I put the end of the line in there to the point where I can see it. And then I've got a little wooden wedge here that I just put down in there to hold that line, and it holds it tight so that it can't come out. Next thing I'm going to do is open the stove a little bit. I turn my pump on, and it's showing me that it's 47 degrees in here, and when it gets to 130, it's going to turn this solenoid valve and shut it off. What I do is I turn my oil on and I wait for 15 seconds before I try to light the stove. That gives it enough time to get the oil down there. I get the stove lit. So I'm going to have to set the camera down here for a minute, and I'll show you turning the oil on, and then I'll show you lighting it. I also have a throttle on my air, so when I go to light it, I shut my air down to almost nothing, and as it gets on fire, I will slowly but surely raise the air up until I get it to the point where it locks in right there. So I'm going to park this camera here for a minute, and I'll get my torch, and I'll let you watch me light it, and we'll go from there. I turn my oil on. You can see the flow right here. I got some temporary marks I put on here so you kind of keep track of where it goes. This torch works really well. You turn the gas on, get it lit, stick it all the way down to the bottom of that bowl where the kerosene is, get her lit. It immediately lights, and then you just start giving it a little bit of air. Bring the air up to where I've got it marked at full throttle right there. I keep my blower off because what I want to do is I want to build this temperature up to 150 degrees, and to do that I have to unplug my ink burner. So when it gets to 130, the alarm's going to come on and tell you it's hot. I'm going to sit here and monitor it for a minute, and I'm going to leave it unplugged, and I'm going to run it up to 150. And when it gets to 150, I'll go down there and I'll put that fan on low and let this stove start getting hot. You've got to get a lot of heat in it and a lot of heat in that stainless steel bowl in the bottom to really make it work and work right. But this thing burns so clean, it burns quite hot down there. So we'll wait for just a little bit, and when I get her up close to 150, I'll show you again. So here's your alarm at 139 and rising, 140. I get it up to 150. I'll put the fan on low just briefly. And this is my ink burner that I've got it unplugged right now, running the solenoid so it can't shut the oil down. It's got to get it hot. There's 150. Put the fan on low. It'll drop down pretty fast. It's already blowing out heat, but I got to get that stove really hot. A lot of nice hot air coming out of that. Especially here on the top of that heat exchanger. It's just wonderful right there. It gets down to 100 and I'll turn the fan back off. And I'll let it go back to 150 again. By now it's starting to get, every part of that stove is starting to get hot. Once it gets hot, what I do is when it'll run on low speed, I'll bring it up to 110 degrees, and then I'll go to medium, and it'll drop down, and when it comes back to 110 degrees, I'll put it on high. And when I can manage about 119 or 120 with it on high, that's perfect. There's your alarm. 137, 138, 140. Comes up pretty quick when she starts getting hot. It's got a lot of fire in it right there. I'll give you a quick peek of what that looks like in there. $114, holding steady. This particular stove was a single gear pump, and to get my pressure, my maximum pressure that pump will put out right now is 20 pounds rather than putting out what it's rated for, which was between 150 and 200 pounds. And the way I did that was I took this relief valve out of here, pull it out, I drilled a hole in the end of it, and I started cutting slots in it to where it would relieve its oil pressure until I got it down to 20 pounds, which takes a little bit of patience to do that. You could put an oil pressure regulator on it if you wanted to, but you really don't want this pump working very hard. You want this pump to not take all your horsepower away from your fan motor and everything, you know, and the higher your pressure, the more horsepower you're going to steal out of your motor. So you can see here the stream of oil that we're running, about a 1/16 of an inch at the bottom. And this stove right now is burning a gallon an hour is what it's burning. And it's holding steady at 114. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it up on the medium. Speed the fan up a little bit. And if it holds that, then we'll speed it up again and we'll put it up on high. Now that it's hot, I'm going to plug my Inkbird back in. And that goes on the cooling mode. This is actually made for reptiles. It's made to keep reptiles warm and cold. And it works real good, so when I set my limit, you can set your limit whatever you want, but 130 is plenty hot for the air temperature coming out of the stove. There's always about a 4 or 5 minute delay. If I was to make an adjustment on here, it would take 4 or 5 minutes to change that. We'll put it on high. It's climbing pretty good, 117. Now it's on high. And it's really pumping out the heat. This heat exchanger right here is amazing how much heat is coming out of this heat exchanger, and it's hot. It's way hot. This blowing out of here is 118, and this blowing out of here is probably 150 or 60. You can see here where my drip line, when the alarm goes off and it goes to a drip, you see these little marks I've made, so when I run my stove I know exactly where I'm looking for. Just like here, this is my main throttle. What I'm looking for to see is when I go back the next time to put it back in exactly the same spot. Just like this. Light it, run it. I put that little notch in there to hold it. Holding steady, 118. It doesn't get any better than that, I'll tell you. And I'll give you another little peek in here. It's glowing red hot. And man, is it kicking out the BTUs of heat. So this stove, I ran a single oil line, a suction line, all the way down. That's my oil tank. Inside of my oil tank, I put a suction screen, a great big tall suction screen in here right over the top of the line, and it's pushed down from the ceiling of this plastic tank to hold it tight, so that any oil that I put in here, I run it through 2 different screens. It gets screened again here, and there's also a round screen in here, so there's nothing that's going to get past those screens. That's a lot of good heat right there. I'm going to take, this heat exchanger has 9 tubes, and I'm putting 4 more. So here's a look at the secondary heat exchange that I put on here to heat my little office with. So you know we had the wood burner in the first heat exchanger. So this is the second heat exchanger, and there's 4 tubes the size of this, 2.5 inch. One runs through here and 3 of them run through this. This is a 6-inch ductwork. This is a duct fan with variable speed. I run it on high all the time. I put an air filter on it so all the air that it sucks in, it's good clean air. it goes through the secondary heat exchanger, it comes out and it goes in and it heats my little office I have up here. I put a temp sender on here so that it runs this fan. When it gets to, I think it was 115 degrees, it turns the fan on automatically. I went back and I changed my exhaust and put the good stuff on. This is the stuff I really like instead of that corrugated stuff that you can adjust. That really seems kind of cheesy, but that's a quick look at the secondary. And I don't know if I mentioned it before or not, but so I take cold air off the bottom of the drum and I run it into the heat exchange, so it gets half of its air through the back of the barrel and the other half comes through that little 4-inch pipe. But man, oh man, does this thing put out the heat. I'm really pretty happy with it, to be honest with you. Really pretty happy with it. But I just wanted you to see that secondary heat exchanger on there and how much more heat that I'm getting out of my exhaust. What would have went up the flue pipe, and now we're stealing all of that even. So pretty efficient, really. Pretty efficient. We get heat out of the stove, we get heat out of primary heat exchanger, and we're getting heat out of secondary heat exchanger. So I hope you liked the video, and if you're making one, always remember that you never want to leave it. You always want to stick around and keep an eye on it. Don't ever run it if you're not there. At least I don't. Thanks for watching.